Welcome, Finn. I'm glad to have you back on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me back, Henrik. I wasn't sure if I was going to make it back, but glad to see I made the cut. Anyways, we're going to talk today about Formant investigations, what they are. We're going to show you an interface that lets you see and understand how your Formant agents are working through their work. And we're going to talk a little bit about what it's like to configure the Formant investigation system. So I'm going to launch right in and show you. This is our new application called Formant Triage, where you can see each one of these cards. If any of you guys are in project management or software development or anything like that, you'll kind of understand this concept of a Kanban. And these cards that you see in the board are similar to like a task that you would see in Monday or Jira or Asana. But instead of humans doing the work and updating the ticket, each card on the board is a ticket in a way that a Formant AI agent is working through. And you can see them progress through their work. They have a specific set of goals that they have to achieve, and they have access to all the data of devices in Formant, and they have access to being able to do things in Formant like send commands and run SQL queries and all these other things that a human would be able to do in Formant. We've given our AI agent the ability to do the same.
Where does this data come from? Let's talk a little bit about this ingestion.
You're probably not going to want to look through 1,000 investigations, which is, again, why we have this like branching concept, such that maybe only 0.5% of the investigations end up in escalated, right? Maybe 99.5% end up in false alarm. So maybe you're the one that's actually wanting to look into those escalated ones. You might want a little bit more detail, but you don't need everything. Maybe somebody more technical, more on the ground is going to look into the really in the weeds details. So again, all of that is totally flexible and customizable.
Finn, if something happens today that doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but 15 days from now, something really bad happens that started with a little thing that happened today, can I then go back and say, hey, 15 days ago, something happened that did not catch my eye, but now I want to go and dig back through that because I think there is a important root cause here.
And after you run that investigation, you could leave a bunch of feedback about why that entrance condition, why that blip of data was really crucial to you in a way such that investigations happening in the future would make sure to catch that blip. So you can totally go back into old data in your data set and kind of tweak the way that the system works going forward with the context of that old incident and what that incident meant to you as an individual, as an employee, and as your organization.
In this case, we talk about me going back to do that. Can you send the system back doing that? I guess what I'm getting at is things like deep research in an LLM, where I say something bad happens today, try and go back and understand what happens, sift through a ton of data, and then come back to me with this post-mortem analysis. Can I have the agent do this?
Totally. Let's select the same win the game persona. And then all I'm going to do to wrap this investigation up is I'm going to add an end node and connect it. And we'll say repeats let's just do it every minute for this, and I'll save that.
What we often see in customers is that there are often things in the macro environment that changes the performance of these advanced manufacturing environments that we often end up working with. Things like literally like weather can impact this very fine-tuned, very sophisticated advanced manufacturing. So if there are certain conditions present that may motivate me to pay a lot of attention, I can go in and set the system, hey, right now, 10x the frequency of constantly trying to understand what's going on because I want to pay a lot of attention right now because a certain set of conditions are present that puts me on high alert. And this is all in your hands here. This is literally feels like you have an employee hand saying, hey, when the weather does this, here's what I want you to do. Here's like your standard operating procedure. And when it does that, do this other thing. And you're literally just sitting there and just plain English asking this junior employee to help you out in this certain specific way that you know is how it needs to be done.
Exactly. There are effectively two steps. The first step is defining who do you want your people, your employees to be. right?
Hmm.
It's really who
Hmm.
are your agents? How do you want their
Hmm.
brains to work? What tools do you
Hmm.
want them to have?
Hmm.
How in depth do you want them to go? How much do you want to pay them? Right? How much do you want to pay them is what model do you want to use? Right? How advanced of an employee do you want them to be?
We have a point of view on what AI model they use.
We're currently giving full flexibility for what model you use. We definitely have an internal perspective on like harder robot problems, like harder data analysis. It's better to use Sonnet or Opus than it is Haiku, for instance, on a more defined problem. I think as we continue to define our product, we might notice that a maybe less suited model is being used by a customer and help them out and help them see, hey, you're not seeing the greatest performance right now. We'd recommend actually that you switch your persona to use a higher end model because it's going to get it right more often. On the flip side, you might be using Opus 4.5 on a super simple categorization problem that you could be using a much lighter weight model on to save you a ton of money. We're planning on building those aspects into our system. As it stands right now, we're giving you the full flexibility to choose anything that we offer between the OpenAI and Anthropic models. You can choose different employees or different personas in our case to carry out that work. And again, if one part of that work is really hard, use a persona that has the right description, the right tools, the right model to carry out that work. And if another part is super easy, then you use a different persona for that. So there's all this flexibility in our system. And again, everything is built on top of the Formant that you already know, which has all of the user management and more importantly, all of the perspective on how data lives and exists in our system, both from the standpoint of reading and understanding data, and also kind of writing back to devices, interacting with devices, and
Mhm.
interacting with the real world, right? Because we interact with the real world through our devices, and we have a perspective on what the real world is and how it should be interacted with.
I love this idea that you essentially build a team. And then if you have a new problem or a new realization of certain things that you want to keep an eye on, you essentially just add an agent to your existing team of agents to now look at this specific thing. What I also really like about it is that with some of our customers, we're dealing with very large enterprise customers. So if best practices from any given location, any given shift at any given location, they can propagate quite easily through the entire operation because you're not out there hiring a new person that now you have to train. You've already configured this thing. And once you find success, it can essentially spread like wildfire.
And that success that you define when you define success in the system can be seen in a number of different ways. And you can also upload context in a number of different ways. I think I showed you before the notion of context through feedback. Another notion of context is just uploading troubleshooting docs, TSS docs, any sort of docs that you have that like define how you currently operate as an operation.
I'm sorry, Finn, what's a TSS doc?
It's a document that describes a specific type of incident and describes a flow of how to resolve that incident. It's essentially a troubleshooting document. So, for example, I can upload that document here, and anytime the investigation goes through and does its job, it can reference that document and understand best practices.
This is very cool. Let me make sure I understand. So, an AI model essentially is trained on a huge body of knowledge that's out
Mhm.
there, but that's really not my business context. That's a bunch of other stuff out in the world. And what you're saying is that this RAG database is essentially my custom context that I can feed to this system and saying, you've learned all this other stuff from the collective wisdom of humanity, quite.
That is exactly correctly understood. An LLM can go really far, and we're seeing the models get better and better at not just generalizable tasks, but like kind of specific ones too. But again, having the context of how your operation works, how your robots work, how your robots break, how your humans at your organization interface with the devices and how they get their own jobs done. All of that sort of information is really valuable to us.
So if we sort of take a step back from this, data-rich action poor means that you're often drowning in data. It's not a data problem. They have data richness. It's what to do with it. And what we used to do is like we used to give you a bunch of dashboards to look at all this data so you could know what's going on. But it was so hard to know what was going on because there was so much data. You were action poor. Now we essentially put this agent in front of all of this data to keep an eye on things, tightly managed by you, tightly instructed by you on what to look for, how to look, and what to act when it finds anything. That is essentially what the product is now and how we have evolved. So at a high level, we're sort of seeing support of these environments with this tool change from this reactive thing where you're constantly trying to absorb all this data and then things fall over and break and you're like, yikes, you have to do something about it, to more proactive prevention. If I'm out there running this environment right now, how does that change my life? What's new? What stays the same?
I think the biggest thing that changes for you is that you and your staff are no longer spending all of this time on trying to address all of these issues that only become issues once they really have to be solved. If we're catching in a proactive way issues before they become stoppers, right, or blockers, in other words, then you can spend so much of your time doing kind of more complex, more gratifying work, really, at the end of the day. Because the work to constantly be looking at a device and try to catch the device before something bad happens is like really really kind of boring work that's super repetitive and really redundant. And if we can throw all that work at an AI agent, then what's the outcome? You and your organization are dealing with less downtime, and you're not dealing with the downtime in the first place. So you can just spend your brain, your human brain, your hours on planet Earth doing much more interesting things. That's our perspective.
That is so interesting, isn't it? I mean, isn't that really the story of all of our lives, right? We often feel like we are drowning in reality and we're not doing all the things that really energize us, that we really want to do. That's powerful. So if you're sitting out there thinking, wow, this is cool shit, this agent can really, really help me not firefight all day. Like what's the first step here?
It's a great question. I mean, I think at the end of the day, if you have a device which is generating data and experiences problems in the real world, and we have a way of interfacing with that device, then I'd say we're ready for you to come to us and we can help you solve your problems. I think that's the biggest thing to focus on is like, this is real now, right? This is a real product that's ready to help you solve your problems.